Wide receivers, let's talk higher. You like Amari Cooper going against the Colts. I don't see anything about where he is on the list or how much more you like him, so you can tell me that once you give us the X's and O's on him. And then, of course, the game that you've been peppering with all of your overs, Christian Watson at Denver, wide receiver 19, 5 above the experts. That one probably requires almost no explanation except to say that they're playing the Broncos. But tell me about Cooper.
Yeah, so I have him at 18 plus 2 ECR right now. He's facing an Indianapolis secondary that has just gotten pummeled by wide receiver ones. 4th most points allowed, 2 number 1 receivers at 22 points a game. We saw Hopkins have a career renaissance, 18 points just a couple weeks ago. Cooper himself putting up wide receiver 20, 13-point day with PJ Walker last week. Over half of his games have been 13 or more fantasy points. Just really steady, really miracle floor when you can do that with PJ Walker. So whether it's Deshaun Watson back, whether it's PJ Walker, this secondary is so bad for Indianapolis, in particular against number 1 guys. I mean, we've seen some huge blowups. I mentioned, of course, Hopkins, but I mean, from Calvin Ridley to whoever they faced as the number 1 receiver has pretty much had at least 18 fantasy points. So I love Amari Cooper. Definitely keep him locked in your lineup no matter who is at quarterback. And then Christian Watson, plus 5 ECR on him. He's kind of a fringe wide receiver too for people. I think you have to lock him into your lineups. One, we saw a full-time rollback, 84% of the snaps, 71% of the routes, near full-time roll. At least the training wheels are off. He's not a part-time player anymore. Plus, he had a bye. He's fully healthy. He's off the injury report. 23% target share in that first week back, and then a whopping 70% of the air yards last week out. 28% of his targets were first read targets at well, which you love to see. Now, I get they have Pat Surtain there in Denver, but he has not been the Pat Surtain of old. Wide receiver ones have gotten deep on him multiple times. DJ Moore, 23 points. Tyreek Hill, 26. Even Terry McLaurin, 14 points. Solid stuff. Yeah, the Denver defense is more vulnerable to tight ends, to running backs, to quarterbacks, but I still think Watson can absolutely, with that week to get the timing down, with obviously Jordan Love showing that he loves this guy and throwing him a bunch of shots that ultimately did not connect. Maybe they do connect this week because he could have had, a 150-yard, 2-touchdown day if even a couple of those deep bombs passed against the Broncos. What a spot to have that welcome to 2023 game.
All right, guys, you're lower than Hollywood Brown at Seattle. You like him at 22. The experts like him all the way up at 15, borderline wide receiver 1 range. Also, George Pickens, and this one makes it pretty obvious to me, at the Rams, wide receiver 32, 5 below the experts. His target share has to go down as Deontay Johnson looks almost certain to return.
Yeah, it's tough ranking Marquise Brown this low, given he's seen 10, 7, 10, 10, and 11 targets across his last 5 weeks, and he's been a top 18 receiver for the vast majority of that. But last week, even on 11 targets, just 4 catches, 34 yards, 5 points. And I think a lot of the reason he's getting steamed up this week is he's facing the Seahawks, 2nd most points allowed to wide receivers. But when you look closely, the last 2 weeks are the only 2 games they've had both of their starting corners out there, and no wide receivers top 13 points against them. They've been very good even with just 1 corner against number 1s all year. Jamar Chase just had 11 points against them. They've been actually sneaky bad against wide receiver 2s. They're allowing the most points to number 2 receivers, but among the middle of the pack to bottom half of the league in terms of points allowed to number 1s. So Brown, even though he had a down week, he had a ton of volume, I just don't trust him. I think the Seahawks secondary is better than what those stats show because they're finally getting healthy. Since they've gotten healthy, they've really locked down receivers and especially number 1 guys. George Pickens, 5 spots below ECR. It's not a good spot against the Rams, especially because they're very zone heavy, top 6 in zone rate in the league. And that's not what Pickens does well. He's much more of a man beater. He's been better against the zone this year than he was his rookie year, but still significantly better against man than he is against zone. And we've seen it's already been so boom or bust, even without Deontay in the lineup, even with the vast majority of targets going his way. He's either been a top 4, top 9, and then 72, 39, 51 wide receiver. So it's been very, very boom or bust for George Pickens. And the 1 week that he had, I looked at the San Fran game where they're a very zone heavy team as well. Deontay Johnson was on the lineup for about half the lineup, the matchup. He had 6 points, wide receiver 51. So I just don't think Pickens, a lot of people clinging to the numbers he had, but Deontay Johnson, with him back, there's no way Pickens continues to get that 32% first read share. I think a lot of that goes back to Deontay, who had 6 targets and a half last time out. So I don't think this matches up well for Pickens at all.
Hail Marys, Michael Wilson against Seattle, 19% roster, and I'm hoping for this one because of all the buys. I'm actually rolling Michael Wilson out. And also you like Wan'Dale Robinson, 23%, and Darius Slayton also going against Washington at only 3%.
Yeah, I had to get a true Hail Mary in there. We'll start with Wilson, who's getting dropped everywhere. Check your waiver wire. I think he's in a really good spot. He's been phenomenal against zone coverage this year. One of the highest yards per route run in zone coverage against the entire NFL. And this team has, we just talked about Seattle being very good against number one receivers. They've actually allowed the most points to wide receiver twos in the league. We just saw Tyler Boyd outscore Jamar Chase. That very rarely happens, but that's how they roll their zone coverage. They take out that number one option. Number two guy typically thrives on there. And we just saw Wilson lead this team on receiving with just 4 targets. He's been a big play threat. He's been a red zone threat. He's been after the catch threat. I love the kid. I think he can really play ball. I think this is the type of matchup where we really could see him thrive. Wan'Dale Robinson, fresh off 27% targets, 73% of the routes, both season highs, as was 8 catches for 62 yards. It's a slot funnel offense. This defense, though, Washington a little bit more generous to outside receivers than slot guys, but I still think because this offense loves to just pepper the wide receiver position, Wan'Dale's in a good spot. He's the highest floor guy here, but I could see Slayton or maybe even Jalen Hyatt, the exciting rookie playing 80% of the snaps, really getting involved for the first time. But Slayton, much more the veteran here, much more trustworthy. 93% of the routes, 17% of the targets, 11 points last week. Washington has been horrendous against wide receiver ones, second most points allowed to the position. It just kind of feels like a Slayton gets deep. They've been getting dusted. That Forbes, their rookie corner, tiny guy that's been getting bodied all year. So I think Slayton's in a good spot. If you're desperate, 3% roster, he's out there in your leagues. You need a Hail Mary. I think Slayton could really get it done for you. What is up, you fantasy wolf? Thanks so much for tuning in. If you haven't already, share your thoughts in the comments. Check out some more videos and join the newest Wolfpack by subscribing below.